Good afternoon. It's Thursday, March 3rd, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein remains undeterred by the wave of anti-Israel protests surrounding his trip to England. Edelstein, who is on an official visit to the UK, yesterday addressed members of Parliament and on Tuesday met with British Foreign Secretary. Anti-Israel activists projected huge messages on the outer walls of the Westminster Palace, where Edelstein spoke before 40 British lawmakers. The messages called on authorities to arrest Edelstein, declaring Israel a so-called racist leader, and was not welcome. In the first ever official visit by an Israeli Knesset speaker to the UK, Edelstein said he viewed the situation as an opportunity to voice Israel's position. Addressing the British parliamentarians, Edelstein stressed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was not because of settlement activity in the West Bank.
The moment that we don't define the symptoms in the right way, or don't define the problem in the right way and talk all the time about things around, those things we see, we can't solve the problem. As long as we will believe that the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria is the heart of the conflict in the Middle East, I know here I will take one step back and say, I know all the right cliches. I can ask a legitimate question, and it's a legitimate question again. When was PLO created? And what does PLO stands for in terms of letters, not what it stands for? Judea and Samaria, the Gaza Strip. What exactly were they going to liberate in 65? And I think that we don't want to go into this discussion of ping pong. We have to, as I've said, stick to practical issues and see how we deal with the issues right now and not throw these cliches about settlements and settlement activities. I promise you that when I get to my constituency in Israel, I have this desire to run away because they're killing me for the freeze in Judea and Samaria. Killing me. And say, you just promise, you don't build anything. Get out of here. We don't want to hear these lies anymore. Everything is frozen. Not a single house being built. My son just got married. He doesn't have a place to live next to us.
The ongoing violence shows no signs of abating. 2 policemen were injured this morning in separate terror attacks. A police officer directing traffic on Route 90 near Aouja in the southern Jordan Valley near Jericho was lightly wounded after being stabbed in the shoulder by a 14-year-old Palestinian girl. She was arrested and handed over to the Shin Bet security agency for questioning. Before dawn, shots were fired at a police vehicle near Ariel, lightly injuring a policeman. The recent events occurred hours after 2 soldiers were wounded, one moderately, after being stabbed by 2 knife-wielding Palestinians in the entrance to Har Bracha last night. The army is still searching for the 2 attackers who fled the scene. Roadblocks have been set up in a number of West Bank locations. The soldiers were transferred to Beilinson Hospital in Petah Tikva for treatment. At the same time, in the nearby community of Yitzhar, security forces captured 2 Palestinians attempting to infiltrate the community. Indictments were served against 2 Israeli Arabs from the north who plotted to carry out Islamic State-inspired attacks. Baha Adin Masarwa and Ahmed were charged at the Nazareth District Court today for offenses that harm state security. The 2, who often prayed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, planned to purchase weapons in order to perpetuate shooting attacks in Nafula, the Gilboa, and in Jerusalem. Further details remain subject to partial gag order imposed on the investigation. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden will head out to the region this weekend for a 5-day visit to Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. Biden will first stop off in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and is expected to arrive in Israel next Tuesday for meetings with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well as President Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem. He will then travel to Ramallah for talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and his final stop will be in Jordan, where he will be meeting with King Abdallah. Joining us now in the studio to review the top stories of the week is political analyst Kalev Ben David. Kalev, good to have you.
Pleasure to be back, Aryeh.
Well, Kalev, as we see, Joe Biden will be coming to the country this weekend, early next week. And is this a sign, after visiting the Arab countries in the region, that perhaps they're sort of getting together as sort of a coalition against ISIS, you think?
Well, certainly one of the things that Vice President Biden will be doing, I'm sure, will be carrying back messages either direct or indirect, from some of the Arab countries that he's been visiting to here to Israel. And of course, one of the priorities is for the United States is this coalition that against ISIS made up mainly for the so-called moderate Arab or Sunni states. I mean, Israel does not have an active role, of course, in that coalition, but of course probably plays a very important role, certainly in intelligence sharing with the United States. But I think one real big issue that Biden will be discussing with the Prime Minister Netanyahu is Syria. And what the United States hopes is the emerging political deal or agreement that they hope to create in Syria. That's really the big unfinished business of the Obama administration that they see in the Middle East is a Syria agreement. And Israel has, of course, made some noises about what kind of agreement they would not be willing to accept. One that, for example, allows Iran to have too big a role in Damascus or in allowing Hizbollah to be on the Golan Heights. So I think that Syria political agreement, that's going to be maybe even the key issue on the agenda.
So, Kalev, we also saw this week, you understand, he went to London and he addressed the parliament and he was badgered by people outside against Israel, BDS, pro-BDS. And also, Shimon Peres, the former president, was in South Africa. And again, he had the same thing. But are these people who are sort of protesting against Israeli leaders visiting their country, is it the fringe, or is this something that Israel has to really worry about?
No, I don't think, I think we can no longer simply describe BDS as a fringe phenomenon. That may have been true a few years ago, but I think it's definitely moved into the mainstream. And you have the emergence, for example, of people in Great Britain like Jeremy Corbyn, the new leader of the Labour Party, who has certainly associates that may be tied with people that back BDS. It's not a fringe phenomenon anymore. It's true that the overall economic impact on Israel, on Israeli business investment, has been minimal at best, but in Europe there is a concern it's moving into the mainstream, and it has affected some companies. Companies like Ahava had to close its shop in London a few years ago. Elbit has been a target in the UK. So no, there is concern. I think it is definitely not a fringe concern.
And yet we had Great Britain agreeing to not allow boycotts against Israel, and again Canada as well banned boycotts. So is Israel having a success in its war against boycotts?
It's having success in terms of individual governments. And the Netanyahu government has made it clear that one of their strategies with Europe is, instead of dealing directly with the EU bureaucracy, which has been not supportive of BDS, but supportive of things like labeling products from the territories, they're trying to appeal to individual European governments in order to get laws passed that against BDS. So yes, partial success, but still you have from the grassroots movement that is growing among people against BDS that eventually influence those governments. So much more has to be done, especially on the grassroots.
Well, looking back at home this week, we saw this bizarre sort of combination of Yair Lapid of Yesh Atid and Avigdor Lieberman of Yisrael Beitenu get together, and they had a press conference saying that Israel's foreign policy, foreign image is being harmed because of the government, and we have no foreign minister. What do you think? Is that a bizarre combination?
No, you know what? I don't think those bedfellows are so strange. Don't forget that Lieberman's party, Yisrael Beitenu, and Lapid's party, Yesh Atid, share one very big common agenda, and that is against the Haredi attempts to influence what we call kfiyah datit, religious coercion in Israel. So they definitely share a common coalition against ultra-Orthodox. And remember, Lapid served in the cabinet with Lieberman when he was the foreign minister. So it is not so strange. There are complaints about they may not like the foreign policy. Israel does have a foreign policy. But they are correct in the criticism that there is no foreign minister. After this amount of time, really the Prime Minister Netanyahu should appoint someone to sit in that chair. Instead, that foreign policy is getting farmed out. Deputy Minister Hotavelli, Dory Gold in the Prime Minister's office, the Mossad is handling foreign affairs.
Exactly.
There should be, by this stage, a foreign minister.
But they're saying that Israel's image has never been so worse.
Exactly. That's even more to the point that he should... Listen, you could excuse Netanyahu the first 6 months of his government. He was waiting to see, especially if Labour leader Yitzhak Herzog would join the government, and he'd give him the ministry. It's clear Herzog is not going to join the government, certainly not Lieberman and Lapid at this point. He should appoint a foreign minister, maybe from his own party, if he could. He's got to find someone he could trust, but he should appoint a foreign minister.
Well, here's another step that may harm Israel's image. The Prime Minister this week asked the Attorney General to come up with a law to exile terrorist families to the Gaza Strip. And now this is against international law. This is bound to have some kind of impact on Israel's
Of course
image.
it is, Aryeh. And you remember back in the early 90s when Israel tried to expel not members of terrorist families, but Hamas officials, terrorists themselves, 400 that they tried to expel them into Lebanon. Suddenly those 400 took up residence right on the Israeli border, sitting on the Lebanese border. It was a big problem for Israel, an embarrassment. Clearly, that strategy didn't work. I don't see how exporting. Of course, it will be a big problem to expel. I don't even think that will leave the courts in Israel. It's too problematic.
Well, very briefly, this week the Prime Minister said that Israel's the 8th largest superpower. He's quoting a survey that they did. So if it's so good, why does it feel so bad?
Well, because Israelis always are. There is a tendency in Israel to always look at the cup that's half empty. And I think that's the case here, surrounded by enemies. All I could say is most Israelis would say only 8th. I mean, we have to be at least 5th, considering all the challenges that are against us. But I think it is significant. I mean, Israel, we should understand the power that we have, especially we are the dominant power in this region, and that should, to some degree, guide our policies here.
Well, Khalid Ben David, good to have you back in IBA News.
Pleasure and a good weekend, and Shabbat Shalom to all the viewers through Shabbat.
A 50-year-old man was killed and 18 others injured after a bus transporting Dan Company bus drivers to their homes flipped over near the northern Israeli village of Zalzir last night. The accident was apparently caused by the bus driver who was speeding. Again, David Adom rescue units assisted in evacuating the passengers to the nearby hospitals. Hundreds of members of the ultra-Orthodox community gathered in Jerusalem last night to protest government plans to recruit Haredi men into the army as part of the expansion of the country's universal enlistment, which hopes to incorporate more Haredi draftees. Demonstrators carried signs reading, "Evil recruiters, leave our kids alone," and tried to block main roads and intersections. Several protesters were detained for humiliating police officers, but the protests went by without incident. Egyptian lawmakers voted to expel legislator Tawfiq Al-Kasha from the parliament for meeting Israel's ambassador Chaim Koren. 465 out of the 490 parliamentarians voted to oust Akasha less than 2 months after he was sworn in. Akasha, who is also a television presenter, caused an outrage when he broadcasted his meeting with Koren, whom he invited to dine at his home. Earlier this week, during a session in Parliament, a lawmaker threw a shoe at Okasha to protest the meeting, while others called for his dismissal. Okasha, who was not permitted to enter the Parliament when yesterday's vote took place, was forced to watch results on a screen outside. He continues to maintain he had done nothing wrong, noting that Egypt enjoys full diplomatic ties with Israel. He said he would appeal the decision in court. The Saudi-dominated bloc of Persian Gulf countries announced it was designating Hizbollah a terrorist organization. The 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council made the declaration yesterday, just 2 weeks after Saudi Arabia canceled a $4 billion aid package for Lebanon's security forces. A statement issued by the GCC Secretary General said the bloc decided to label Hizbollah a terror organization because of hostile acts carried out by the Shiite group within its member states. He added that the decision also applies to Hizbollah's leaders, factions, and affiliates. For its part, Iran called the decision a mistake. Back at home, an ancient wine press dating back to Roman times was among other relics uncovered in the grounds of the former Schneller Army base in Jerusalem. The artifacts were revealed during excavations carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority. IBA's Margaret Lutkevich brings us this report.
The large winery dates back to the Roman or Byzantine period, some 1,600 years ago. A white mosaic surface surrounding the pit that was part of the wine press was used to extract juice from grapes, which were stored in the 8 cells around the press and later blended to wine.
We find a very elaborated wine press for making wine. We find here Bathhouse, very unique and large bathhouse dating to the Roman period. We find here ritual baths, numerous ceramic, pottery and glass vessels. We have also an evidence that the Roman 10th Legion was here.
A bathhouse with terracotta pipes was also uncovered. Some of the clay bricks bear the stamp of the name of the 10th Roman Legion.
I'm standing right now in an installation which was used possibly as a Jewish ritual bath from the Second Temple period or as a water cistern. What is important about this installation is that it was later reused as a refuse pit by the Roman villa, which was built here in the late Roman and early Byzantine period, in the 4th or 5th century CE. Inside this pit, we found thousands of broken vessels, clay vessels, and also glass vessels.
From 1860 to 1940, the Schneller base operated as a German Protestant orphanage and was taken over by the British at the start of the Second World War and turned into a military base. In 1948, the British abandoned the site and the Haganah moved in. The site remained an Israeli army base until 2008, when it was vacated to pave the way for apartments for the ultra-Orthodox community.
But nobody knew, not the German, not the British, and not the Israelis, what they are sitting on. When we, the archaeologists, arrive here, we discover here ancient remains dating to the late Roman period, the beginning of the Byzantine period. I'm talking about the 3rd and 4th century CE.
Wherever one turns over a stone in Jerusalem, ancient relics relating to the city's past are uncovered. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
I'm from Israel.
Stock talk now. Share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up today, and shekel was down against trading against foreign major currencies. Here, let's take a look at the late afternoon numbers. Taking a look at the weather now, and the forecast is for partly cloudy to clear skies with pleasant temperatures. There's a chance of some rain in the north. Here are the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That brings us to the end of this broadcast. I'll be back on Sunday for another daily edition of IBA News. I'm Ari O'Sullivan, wishing you a good evening, a great weekend, and shalom from Jerusalem.